in Afghanistan.
Women's rights in Afghanistan have been severely restricted.
Asia and the Taliban government of Afghanistan has ordered an indefinite ban on university education for women.
It's another very troubling move, and it's difficult to imagine how a country can develop without the active participation of women.
We reminded them that humanitarian principles, non-discrimination was a key part of that, and they were wiping out our women from the workplace.
Girls have no right to study anymore.
The prevention of secondary education will mean that in 2 years there will be no girls entering into university.
This unacceptable stance will have significant consequences for the Taliban and will further alienate the Taliban from the international community and deny them the legitimacy they desire.
Just 2 months ago, Taliban, which now has ruled much of Afghanistan, has been criticized for restricting the human rights, particularly toward the right of women and girls to workplace and to have an education. Today, I will give a brief introduction about the country and also talk about how Taliban has studied and developed along the history. Afghanistan is located in Central Asia, surrounded by 6 other countries. Normally, countries in such a location are more likely to attract outsiders. Meanwhile, it has a large population of different ethnic groups in relatively similar proportion, which made it hard to be governed. In terms of its geological environment, the large portion of the country is actually mountainous. Now, despite all the river and water reservoirs, Afghanistan still remains a relatively dry nation. Therefore, with such a poor geological condition, it is hard to develop national economy through agricultural industry, just like China did after its founding. And also, it is one of the least developed countries over the world today. Next, if we look into the national flag, you will see the Afghan emblem. On the top is the Shahada, or the Muslim creed. So we can know Afghanistan was a theocratic country. On the bottom is the name of Afghanistan, written in Arabic, and on top of that is the Arabic year of 1298, written in Arabic numerals, which also in the standard calendar is 1919, and it was the year that Afghanistan was relinquished from British colonization and became an internationally recognized sovereign nation known as Afghanistan. After it gained independence of 1947, Pakistan has good reason to meddle in Afghanistan's affairs, much as Germany in World War II devoted its diplomatic efforts to prevent an alliance between France and Russia. Pakistan has invested time, funds, and military forces into preventing Afghanistan from establishing ties with India.
Afghanistan. Soviet troops were everywhere throughout the capital and the country. Moscow claimed they were there because they'd been...
And when dated back to 1979, Soviet troops invaded Afghanistan to back an ally, the new communist Afghan government. Together, they wanted to transform the country into a socialist state, but they faced resistance. Afghanistan was a theocratic country. People there have respective creeds and some share the same religion. So they decided to unite together and form independent militaries, collectively known as the Mujahideen.
Now, with no women about, the Mujahideen have had to learn to...
In the meantime, the Mujahideen received immediate attention from a plethora of state actors, including Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the most important competitor against Soviet during the Cold War, the US. After 2-year conflict, Soviet Union had already suffered from the enormous economic cost, so they finally decided to withdraw the troops. But poor Afghan civilians still struggled to survive in the wars which broke out between various Mujahideen factions. Some of these Mujahideen were thought to be the country's most notorious warlords. They committed widespread rape, murder, and extortion, while Kabul was heavily bombarded and partially destroyed by the fighting. In September 1994, students from Islamic madrasas in Pakistan formed an organization, Taliban, meaning the student in Pashto, who soon had military support from Pakistan. It was founded by Muhammad Omar, who had also joined the Afghan Mujahideen in the Soviet-Afghan War. He played an important role in defending Islamic principles against the spread of Western culture in Afghanistan. On the other hand, he has been criticized for his strict government and for his extremist views. Under the guidance of Omar, Taliban soon taking control of Kandahar city that year. They conquered more territories until finally driving out the government of Ravani from Kabul in 1996, where Taliban established an emirate that gained international recognition from 3 countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. But since they committed beatings, stoning, and public execution under the Taliban regime, many refused to admit as a legitimate government. Later, Taliban found another powerful ally.
The most wanted terrorist in the world, Osama bin Laden.
Altered by Afghanistan's ruling Taliban.
The ruling Taliban's refusal to surrender suspected terrorist bin Laden.
The U.S. will hold Afghanistan responsible for any attack linked to bin Laden.
Nearly simultaneous bombs blew up in front of the American embassies, which was soon proved to be directly linked to Al-Qaeda, whose leadership belongs to bin Laden.
At 10:30 a.m. local time on August 7, 1998, a massive truck bomb exploded outside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi's CBD. Minutes later, another truck bomb detonated outside the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam in neighboring Tanzania.
Then the U.S. issued the ultimatum to Taliban, requiring them to hand over Laden, but got rejected due to the pledge binding Al-Qaeda to the Taliban. 3 years later, another terrorism took place in the U.S.
Today, we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center.
Very sketchy details reaching us here at Sky Centre. Important enough to bring to you, though, at this early stage. We believe that a plane has crashed into the World Trade Center in New York.
What came down? What came down? We crashed. The other trade center's down. It's down.
The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
After the 9/11 attack, a US-led coalition invaded Afghanistan to hunt down bin Laden and topple the Taliban. The Taliban region surrendered and asked for amnesty. The US refused. The Taliban leadership fled to Pakistan, while most fighters went into hiding in rural areas of the countries. Then, the US promised to rebuild the country and turn it to democracy. In 2002, Afghan government was set up by the US and UN. Meanwhile, the Mujahideen leaders were invited to run the local government. Over $10 billion were given to build roads, hospitals, and utilities, but many of projects never took shape since the Afghan government was deeply corrupt.
And one of the most difficult decisions that I've made as president, we set clear objectives to refocus on Al-Qaeda, to reverse the Taliban's momentum, and train Afghan security forces to defend their own country. Starting next month, we will be able to remove 10,000 of our troops from Afghanistan by the end of this year.
In 2012, considering having spent a great amount of money on the affairs in Afghanistan, the US decided to reduce its troops and rely more on Afghan's government. But years of corruption had led many Afghans to distrust their government, leaving room for the Taliban to start governing their old territories again. But this version of Taliban is more flexible than their rules in the 90s. People call it the new Taliban. In February 2020, the Trump administration went straight to the Taliban to strike a deal. They agreed to leave Afghanistan.
It's time to bring our people back home.
To end America's longest war.
The U.S. will soon complete its withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan.
Taliban fighters have flooded the
In August 2021, the Biden administration delivered on that deal as the final troops pulled out, the Taliban attacked, and the world witnessed the Afghan army surrender and fled, with the Taliban entering Kabul unopposed. The new Taliban was thought to be a democratic and humanitarian authorities at the very beginning. However, 1 year after Taliban's access to power, the plight of Afghans is worsening. The economic situation is dire, malnutrition rates are increasing, and women's rights are being curtailed. In the public areas, any kind of media is prohibited to be played, including music or movie. Everything in Afghanistan looks like a nightmare. It is hard to imagine how the country will develop in the following days.
Afghanistan. Pakistan. President Obama has called it unnecessary war.
It is ambitious, but it's also important.